Once upon a time, in 1845, two Englishmen, James Pilkington and Henry Threlfall Wilson, founded a brilliant shipping company called the White Star Line. Its purpose was to capitalize on the Australian gold rush by sailing passenger ships to the southern hemisphere. Its first acquired ship was Elizabeth, and its first built steamship was Royal Standard. But like so many others in the shipping trade, they had their share of bad luck. The Taylor, which they described as superior to any ship hitherto dispatched to the Australian colonies, ran aground off Lambay Island and sank on her maiden voyage in 1854 with the deaths of half the people on board. In 1863, the Lord Raglan vanished with 300 people. The following year, Royal Standard struck an iceberg on her return trip, but she managed to limp back home. And on top of everything else, the company was being driven to bankruptcy. But that wasn't even the worst of it. As late as the mid-19th century, ocean voyages were grim necessities instead of pleasure cruises. After his 1842 voyage from Liverpool, English author Charles Dickens called his Boston-bound ship not unlike a gigantic hearse with windows in the sides. Of his bunk, he wrote, "Nothing smaller for sleeping in was ever made, except coffins." American author Mark Twain was equally unimpressed with a similar mid-century voyage of his own. He complained of no place to smoke but in an ugly den with no seats. He wrote, "The seas broken through the cracks every little while and drenched the cabin thoroughly." Even after commercial ships began to sail on fixed schedules, passengers endured cramped, unsanitary conditions for up to a month. Food was bad, disease was rampant, and the sea was unpredictable. Of every 100 ships that would set sail, 16 would never reach port, some even disappearing without a trace. Some ships sank, like the Birkenhead, a troop carrier that went down off Cape Town with 454 drowned. A mid-Atlantic fire claimed 471 lives aboard the Austria, an emigrant ship bound for America. It wouldn't be until the invention of wireless communication that the vanishing of certain ships, like the city of Glasgow, would cease. The North Atlantic may have been harsh, but the world was getting smaller. Travel and mail between Europe and North America were increasing. By the late 19th century, technology and ship design were advancing to meet these needs, and shipbuilders focused on comfort, style, and speed. With each advance, the transatlantic run took less time. Seeking to make the most of this trend, a 32-year-old Liverpool businessman named Thomas Henry Ismay legally incorporated the name, emblem, and goodwill of the nearly bankrupted White Star Line he bought in 1867 for £1,000. Formerly the directors of the National Line, Ismay and his friend George Hamilton Fletcher saw the commercial possibilities of introducing superior iron ships to the North Atlantic passenger trade. Fletcher, who also owned a fleet of sailing ships, served as the business force behind Ismay's visions. Their Oceanic Steam Navigation Company found the capital for a revitalized White Star Line and financial backer Gustav Schwab, another Liverpudlian. Following a billiard game with Ismay, Schwab arranged the deal with one main stipulation, that Ismay work exclusively with the Belfast shipbuilding firm Harland and Wolff, partly owned by Schwab's nephew, Gustav Wolff. The following year, Ismay brought aboard another friend, William Emery, whose father had been an early mentor to his career, and Oceanic Steam Navigation became Ismay, Emery and Company. Thus prepared, the new White Star ordered 6 innovative liners. The first one was Oceanic, and she sailed in March 1871. The remaining 5 were Baltic, Republic, Tropic, Asiatic, and Atlantic. All were single-propeller, iron-hulled liners. Within just a few years, Harland and Wolff began using steel instead of iron. As the technology advanced and commercial liners needed more power, the number of propellers would increase to 2 and later 3. The new luxury liners were built for a new kind of passenger who can afford them. In their world, a dog arrived at a party in a $15,000 diamond collar. An elegant dinner was served entirely on horseback. Newfound wealth found a new style during the Gilded Age, a name given by American author and social critic Mark Twain to the last 3 decades of the 19th century. The industrialized Western world was secure and prosperous in the years following the American Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War. Poverty was still everywhere, but the growing middle class now enjoyed leisure time, and the upper class flaunted its wealth. The great minds of science and business were speeding up a pulsing industrial beat that drowned out Mother Nature's slower, gentler rhythms. Progress was the new god for those who wanted to see results larger than life. Few thought about the consequences. Such consequences led to the building of safer ships. On April 1st, 1873, the White Star liner Atlantic sank off the coast of Nova Scotia. Slowed by bad weather en route from Liverpool to New York, she was running low on coal. Captain James Wilson changed course for Halifax, but the ship ran onto Meagher's Rock in the middle of the night. During her quick sinking, half the lifeboats were washed away, and of her 952 passengers and crew, 560 died. Most of the survivors clung to the bow, which stayed above the surface. This was considered the worst North Atlantic shipping disaster to date. As ships grew larger during the latter decades of the 19th century, more lives and bigger investments were at stake on a wild, uncaring ocean that no human effort would ever be able to tame. Greater speed and power were necessary to keep up with the competition. Improved safety features were crucial to make sure that passengers, the most valuable payload of all, reached their destination alive and, if possible, with words of praise on their lips. During the Gilded Age, bigger certainly was better in the war of commerce between shipbuilders. Increasing trade and immigration demanded ships that would accommodate both steerage passengers and the thrill-seeking rich. In March 1887, Harlan and Wolff laid the keels for 2 White Star ships that would be considered the first modern ocean liners, big, fast, and comfortable, Teutonic and Majestic. 10,000 tons each would reach a speed of 20 knots, crossing the Atlantic in a mere 7.5 days. White Star's chief rivals, the British Cunard Line and the German Hamburg America Line, would have to rise to the challenge. However, not everyone was optimistic about the industrial race towards the 20th century. Morgan Robertson, an American writer and self-professed psychic, spun a cautionary tale in his 1898 novel Futility. He told of Titan, a huge ocean liner that struck a North Atlantic iceberg one April night and sank with great loss of life. The name, size, and speed of his ship were hauntingly similar to those of a liner that White Star would build 11 years later. This short novel, with its title suggesting Mother Nature's opinion of Gilded Age values, was widely published in American magazines. One American with no fear of progress was financier J.P. Morgan, a railroad tycoon who was both admired for his runaway success as a capitalist and vilified for his ruthless business ethics. The booming Atlantic passenger trade had caught his eye. After several years of investing in some of the German companies, he decided to expand further into the lucrative world of the British companies. To do this, he started a price war with the lines he already owned, and then made attractive offers to those British, European, and American lines that were losing money. His international navigation company, which began in 1893 with the purchase of the American Inman and Red Star shipping lines, grew to become International Mercantile Marine, after acquiring the Atlantic Transport Leyland and Dominion lines. Morgan's desire to own a major British shipping enterprise focused on the White Star Line. In December 1902, he bought White Star for £10 million, 10 times its earnings in 1900. There had been early opposition from the Ismay family, which had built the line up from nothing and still held a controlling interest, but the sale eventually went through. It was an offer that the shareholders simply could not refuse. The liners continued to sail proudly under the Union Jack, but now an American hand rested heavily on the tiller. Meanwhile, to secure British marine resources against such buyers like Morgan, the government approached Cunard with an offer. In exchange for making its ships available to the Royal Navy, should there be a war, Cunard would receive access to a steady stream of government loans for its competition against White Star, Hamburg America, and any other line that might edge its way to the front ranks of the shipping race. The unspoken objective was that, in times of peace and prosperity, this agreement would ensure Cunard's continued participation in the British tax base. The White Star Line flourished with International Mercantile Marine's backing. 1 year after the purchase, J.P. Morgan offered White Star's director J. Bruce Ismay the position of managing director and president of IMM and its subsidiaries. As the son of Thomas Henry Ismay, Bruce had taken charge of White Star 4 years earlier, along with co-owners Harold Sanderson and Lord William J. Peary, and impressed Morgan with his abilities and vision. By this time, Thomas had passed away, and his partner, William Emery, retired from the board along with W.S. Graves and Bruce's brother James. The influence of the Ismay family on transatlantic passenger trade had come a long way since Thomas first purchased a failing business for a mere £1,000. In 1907, the Cunard Line amazed the world with 2 revolutionary ships, Lusitania and Mauretania. At 31,000 tons, their 4 turbine propellers would drive them across the Atlantic in less than 5 days at a speed of 28 knots. Mauretania would hold the record as the world's fastest liner for 20 years. Lusitania featured the unlimited elegance of Europe's great hotels, complete with beautifully appointed drawing rooms and plush lounges built by master craftsmen. Cunard now had the fastest British ship, an honor that once belonged to White Star's 25,000-ton Adriatic. The next step up in size and luxury would have to be something even more spectacular. While Cunard had positioned itself for speed, White Star would astound the world with sheer spectacle. That same year, over a pleasant summer dinner in London, White Star's Bruce Ismay and Harland and Wolff's Lord William Peary conceived a new line of ships. They envisioned the largest moving objects ever made by man, 3 liners to surpass both Cunard and their German rivals. At 45,000 tons, these ships would be 50% bigger and 100 feet longer than anything yet built, able to carry more passengers to America than ever before. These 3 liners would be constructed to lure the world's wealthiest travelers with their magnificence. They would be called Olympic, Titanic, and Gigantic. A year after these 3 new liners were envisioned, signatures on a contract set the dream in motion. Bruce Ismay, Harold Sanderson, and other ranking White Star members arrived in Belfast to review Harland and Wolff's construction plans for the 3 new wonder ships. Lord Peary presented the drawings, assisted by his nephew and managing director Thomas Andrews. The contract, signed on July 31st, stated that Harland and Wolff would begin construction of 2 liners now and the 3rd later. This agreement signaled an economic boom for Belfast, whose lifeblood was shipbuilding, and a higher profile for Southampton, fast becoming England's leading passenger port. White Star encouraged Harland and Wolff's designers to pursue their vision of grandeur with no expense spared. The planners and draftsmen proposed huge liners whose passenger amenities would make them the most awesome vessels afloat. First-class passengers would make their dramatic entrances and exits on a sweeping grand staircase beneath an elegant dome of glass and iron. First and second-class passengers would also have elevators to carry them between decks. The middle deck would feature a swimming pool for passenger fitness. A Turkish bath would make soothing relaxation possible even on the high seas. The extravagance had to be obvious to all. Alexander Carlyle was the chief designer who oversaw this vision. After his retirement next year, it would be Thomas Andrews who would bring to life every detail of these ships. The next generation of ocean liners moved from the draughtsman's table to the real world of the ship workers. To accommodate the building of these massive liners, Harland and Wolff had to convert 3 of their already enormous berths into 2 bigger ones. By the end of the year, they had built the tallest gantry ever, which towered over Belfast and laid Olympic's first keel plate beneath it. Its materials and equipment weighed over 6,000 tons, and it occupied a space 840 feet long by 270 feet wide. Between launching and sailing, the heavy lifting was handled by floating cranes, which were towering hinged structures aboard specifically counterweighted barges. This was the equipment that allowed the ship workers to install enormous pieces such as the boilers and funnels. They were hiring ship workers in record numbers. The channel of the River Lagan had to be dredged to 50 feet for ships with a deeper draft. In Southampton, White Star arranged for similar dredging. Meanwhile, Bruce Ismay was in America, doing whatever was necessary to ensure that the piers in New York Harbor would be long enough for his liners to dock. When Ismay approached the harbor board with a request to extend the International Mercantile Marine's docks, however, the board refused, citing its concerns about navigational safety. Ismay then appealed to the business community, which obviously stood to gain from any increase in passenger traffic. The issue was taken to Washington, D.C., where the War Department held ultimate jurisdiction over all port access in the U.S., with some hard feelings in New York. IMM finally received permission to prepare for the arrival of its wonder ships. On March 31st, ship workers laid Titanic's first keel plate next to Olympic. As construction continued, White Star prepared the world for the first passenger liners to exceed 40,000 tons, floating luxury hotels with pools, palm trees, and no end of elegant detail. To evoke their mythic stature, Bruce Ismay had drawn his new ships names from Greek mythology. Olympic was named for Mount Olympus, home of the gods. Titanic honored the Titans, powerful giants who challenged the gods, only to have their arrogance punished by a spectacular defeat. Ismay was obviously impressed by the Titan's size and strength, not their ultimate fate. The Board of Trade, the British government agency that regulated commercial traffic, submitted a set of guidelines that Parliament passed as the Merchant Shipping Act of 1894. Among the articles was a requirement that the number of lifeboats carried should be based on the ship's weight and not a head count of the passengers and crew. So by 1909, all ships needed to carry lifeboats, but not everyone agreed on how many, though final plans for Titanic and Olympic called for 16 boats each, plus 4 Engelhart collapsible boats that could be stored more easily. They were designed by Harland and Wolff's chief draftsman, Roderick Chisholm, and built at the shipyard. Of the original 16, 14 were 30 feet long and, when fully provisioned, had a capacity of 65. These boats, 3 to 16, were attached to their davits and hung inward on the boat deck. Boats 1 and 2 were emergency cutters, seating 40 each. They were already attached to davits, but were swung out and ready to use in case, for instance, someone fell overboard. Collapsibles A through D, whose folding canvas sides allowed for easy deck storage, could each hold 47 people. A and B were lashed to the roof of the deckhouse or officers' quarters near the fore end of the boat deck, while C and D were stored under the davits for boats 1 and 2. All were made of wood and equipped with oars, a detachable mast, and a sail. Designer Alexander Carlyle originally saw 48 and possibly even 64 boats per ship, using new davits by the Welland Company. Bruce Ismay was not interested in erring on the side of safety and disagreed with Carlyle, claiming that 48 lifeboats would take up too much deck space and cause passengers to worry. The new ships were as good as lifeboats themselves, and the possible needs for the smaller craft would be rescuing a person who fell overboard, or at worst, carrying passengers between ships in the case of some mid-ocean emergency, presumably a problem with the other ship. Since Ismay was the customer, and the kind who didn't want good deck space wasted on unnecessary precaution, Carlyle was not about to argue with him. In the end, 20 boats with a total of 1,178 seats were considered adequate for 3,547 passengers and crew. In fact, Titanic and Olympic would actually exceed the outdated British Board of Trade requirements by 17%. But there still wasn't enough lifeboats to accommodate every passenger. On May 31st, 1911, Lord and Lady Peary, both celebrating birthdays, hosted a group of distinguished visitors in Belfast for the launch of Titanic and the completion of Olympic. The guests included J. Bruce Ismay, IMM owner J.P. Morgan, White Star director Harold Sanderson, and former White Star partner W.S. Graves. After being received at the shipyard office, they moved to a specially built grandstand that was set apart from the thousands of people who came to witness the historic moment. Aided by 23 tons of soap, tallow, and train oil spread on the slipway, the ship slid easily into the River Lagan, reaching 12 knots and coming to a gentle stop 1 minute later. She was then towed to the fitting-out basin for completion. In spite of the red flag hoisted on the stern, 2 rockets, and an 8-minute warning, shipwright James Dobbin had been fatally injured by a falling support he was knocking out during Titanic's launch, which pinned his leg. Unaware of the mishap, White Star officials celebrated over lunch, accepted the now completed Olympic, and sailed her to Liverpool to begin her maiden voyage.